think I brought this up quickly last week. I'm going to bring it up again because I had a bunch of people mention to me how there have been a bunch of news stories, and I noticed on France AFP News and on BBC they were doing these stories again on hikikomoris. And I saw in the English-French service on YouTube, they had this 20-minute documentary by this journalist recently returned from Japan with this amazing new phenomenon that's sweeping Japan that everyone has to be careful about, called the hikikomori. He's speaking like with a Cockney accent until he got to the word hikikomori, where for some reason he had to pronounce that with like the most exaggerated. I mean, it's a French TV show, so it's probably not fair to say that it's an exaggerated French accent, but it sounded like an overdone French accent version of the Japanese words. It sounded totally wrong to make it sound even more exotic. And it's this idea they were explaining, yes, there is this in this increasing isolation of this high pressure society of Japan. There are these people who never leave the house and they can't face society, and they're afraid of being judged, and the conformity and the pressure and the expectations. And it's something, it's a real disaster for Japan. And they asked, is this something you think that could happen in other countries? And the guy was, yes, sometimes they connect on the internet, and it's starting to emerge even in countries like Europe. Okay. Hikikomori are recluses. They're shut-ins. Every single country, especially developed countries, have always had hermits, recluses, shut-ins, people that can't interact with society. And again, there's always the cultural aspect. There's always maybe there's specific dynamics to Japan. I get that. The specific things about the education system, specific things about the society. Frankly, the willingness of parents to continue looking after their kids even 30s and 40s when they are too afraid to go outside, I get that. But social anxiety, shut-ins, these are not invented in Japan. Hikikomori is not, this is a totally universal thing, and it's pretty typical, I guess, of global news coverage that they discover something in Japan, like garbage collection. Gomi shushu. Yes, what is this gomi shushu? They'll talk about like how Japan has this amazing thing where they put out rubbish and people collect it and they take it to the garbage dump. And do they have garbage collection in other countries? And I've heard it's spreading. It's pretty much, not to diminish. It's a significant problem in Japanese society. It's something that the government, has a specific focus on. I think it's got a lot to do with the type of and particularly in this age where, for example, most parents of the last generation only had one kid. So most people my age are from one-child families. So there's basically you have these people who cannot look after their parents, for example. They're looked after. Their parents don't want to sort of let them go, or and so they sort of stay stuck, and it has serious consequences. Like for a country that doesn't have enough people out working. And is desperate to try to figure out how to address these problems, and trying to figure out how to harness, and there's whole government departments set up trying to figure out how to help hikikomori re-engage, how to help shut-ins actually function better in society. But the idea that this is an exotic Japan-specific thing is really, really weird. It's one of these things that's just sort of taken off, where I guess the journalists get to sort of feel like they're taking credit for discovering that people can be recluses. Barringer is a recluse, but not rich enough to be an eccentric one, though. Yeah. And as Lauren Sakai says, exactly everything. I think that's exactly the point. It's like I was just making fun of. You could exoticize garbage collection. There's a hungry market. This is partly why I make videos that people watch. Whereas I'm pretty sure if I was in New Zealand doing the same thing, there wouldn't be anyone watching. There are people who just have a real interest in Japan and wanting to understand Japan. From my perspective, my desire is to portray the normalness of it, or at least to portray everything. It's not, even if it's not necessarily normal, to not give a sensationalized view, but to give the perspective of someone who lives here and try to give you a settled, full picture of what's going on here. That's sort of my objective. But sure, there's a lot of people who find Japan really interesting, and this idea that it's like Mars allows people who are willing to take a couple of quick shortcuts the opportunity to pretend that they've discovered something unique, and people instantly believe it, and it's just something that you deal with living here. But yeah, anyway, the whole gone thing is normal. Well, no, it's not. That's part of the reason I'm drawing attention to it. But the fact is that it's not normal because of anything inherent to Japanese society per se. Even by Japanese societal standards, we're highlighting the stories because they're affecting foreigners. But my point always that I always come back to with the Gon story and the I Love Lamp guy is that this shouldn't be normal even by Japanese standards. The fact that this is and that this sort of thing could happen. I mean, this is a scenario, and it's interesting. You should weigh it up and look at it. On the one hand, people could look at Japan and say, hey, we should be like Japan. We should detain people for months and put them in jail even when they're innocent and have a 99.9% conviction rate, because look at the safety. And you could say that Japan's sort of taken that decision, but on the other hand, are you willing to be one of the people who are in jail and detained like that, where it's not justified? So these are just normal questions that are not anything to do with the fact that Japan's like Mars. It's just the fact that this is just a different angle on questions that exist in every country, and that's how it should be seen and considered. Mr. Korichep, good for you. I didn't cover it this week, but there's been the BBC covered a rash of news stories that were also happening in Japan this week about elderly increasingly who are living alone and can't look after themselves, who are committing petty crimes deliberately in order to go to prison to be looked after, which is incredibly sad. But yes, indeed. Japan, as a normal country, doesn't sell news. Well, I rely on, I guess, perhaps I rely on the sensationalists sensationalizing Japan to get people interested. And I go for that niche of people interested in the sensationalized stories who actually want to understand what's happening, and I rely on that. So, yes, I'm definitely always going to be minor leagues, but there you go. Oh, no, that wasn't good timing, was it? After that introduction, I had to come to this. I actually tweeted this week, and I was pointing out I spent all this time trying to explain that Japan is normal, and then a story like this happens. Oh, what a disaster.